As much as I like to joke about the outrageous number of ACOG models, Trijicon isn't the only company with more SKUs than they know what to do with. The bad boys over at EOTech also like to experiment with reticle variations and make 10 identical looking optics with trivial differences. And just like Trijicon, EOTech keeps making their old optics forever. Really milking that 512, guys. There have been several different body styles of the EOTech holographic weapon sight since their inception in the early 2000s. The difference in layout usually has to do with the type and placement of the batteries. Most of the HWS product lines are also available in multiple heights and with or without night vision compatible settings. I get that it's difficult for people to keep track of all the models of EOTechs. Personally, I just memorized all of them right after I got done memorizing every model of Glock and all 3 generations of Smith & Wesson automatics. But I think we can articulate it in a way that makes it easier to understand. We can start by breaking the currently produced model of EOTech into 2 main groups: the older 500 series, which are powered by 2 inline batteries, and the newer XPS series, which is powered by a single transverse battery. The original models of EOTech and the Bushnell holographics that preceded them were powered by a pair of inline batteries. These were allegedly prone to recoil death over time. On heavy recoiling platforms, the springs in the battery compartment would wear out, leading to inconsistent contact, and the sights would flicker or shut off. I don't know how common this actually is. I suspect the round counts required are pretty obscene, but when you're talking about weapons that get beat around a whole lot in the military or law enforcement, I can see why it would be an issue. The dual inline battery EOTechs have been powered at various times by N-type batteries, AA batteries, and even CR123 batteries. EOTech's battery life has remained surprisingly consistent over the last 2 decades, regardless of how complex the reticle is or what type of batteries are used. This is at least partly explained by the way holographic reticles are projected. It doesn't matter how detailed the reticle is, the holographic plate is always illuminated by a single laser beam. So a complex circle dot reticle on a red dot like the SIG Romeo 8T will negatively impact battery life if you run it with the full reticle all the time. A more complex holographic reticle uses no more energy to illuminate than a single dot. So there's no downside to the much more complicated holographic reticles except that they can potentially obscure part of the target that you might like to be able to see. This also means there will probably never be a model of EOTech with a user-selectable reticle, because to change the reticle, you have to change the holographic plate. If you remember the video I made on the original Bushnell holographic sight, it came with a selection of plates with different reticle styles. As cool as that feature is, the downsides were not a great trade-off compared to the later generations. Battery life on the EOTechs actually has gotten significantly better over the years, just not in a way that compares favorably to red dots. These days, a red dot with less than 50,000 hours of advertised battery life makes you look poor, but the longest lasting EOTechs are the dual AA models, which are advertised as getting 2,500 hours of battery life on a pair of lithium AAs. If you compare that to one of the oldest models of EOTech, powered by 2 N-type batteries, I've seen those advertised at 200 hours of battery life. The newest versions of EOTech powered by a single CR123 are advertised at about 1,000 hours of battery life, which isn't that bad when you consider that the dual CR123 inline battery types were only advertised at 1,100 hours. EOTechs have also been available in absolute height or lower 1/3 height, and pretty consistently over the years the absolute height optics are mounted with a crossbolt, and the lower 1/3 height optics have a QD lever. The lower 1/3 QD mount optics also typically have had the buttons on the side instead of on the rear. In addition, some models of EOTech are night vision compatible and some are not. All EOTechs have 20 daylight settings, significantly more granularity than you'll find on a red dot, and the night vision models have an additional 10 night vision settings. It's a common misconception that non-night vision EOTechs can still get dim enough for use with night vision, they just don't have the button to switch quickly to the night vision settings. That's actually backwards. All EOTechs have the night vision button, but on non-night vision models, it's inoperable and covered up. That's why the 512 has that little nub above the brightness buttons. It's covering up an NV button that isn't connected to anything. The night vision button on the EOTechs quickly switches you into a lower range of brightness settings. When you're in daylight mode, you cannot decrease the reticle below the minimum daylight setting, and when you're in night vision mode, you cannot increase it above the maximum night vision setting. I'm sure somebody in the comments is going to claim that on the lowest daylight setting, the EOTech is still usable under night vision, but seeing as those people tested it in a Walmart parking lot at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I think it's safe to just ignore them. This video was made possible by supporters of the channel on Subscribestar and today's sponsor, Munition Works. Check out the links in the video description for ways to support the show, and thank you for watching. Alright, let's try to make some sense of the EOTech lineup, starting with the Inline battery series. We could also call these the 500 series because all of the model numbers start with 5. The second number in the model actually gives you a hint about what configuration the optic is in. So a 1 in the middle of the model number indicates no night vision, and a 5 means night vision. The last digit in the model number is the sub-series, so the 2 is the classic EOTech that most people are familiar with. The 5X2 EOTechs are absolute height with a crossbolt mount, i.e. the 512 and the 552 are both absolute height, but the 552 has the night vision button. The 5X8 EOTechs are otherwise identical, but lower 1/3 with a QD lever. Models ending in 1 are the older style of holographic weapon sight with the shorter, stubby body that takes 2 N-type alkaline batteries, similar to the original Bushnell holosight. Models ending in 6 or 7 are pretty weird. They both have crossbolt thumbscrew mounts but sit taller than the absolute height, and they have side-mounted buttons. The weirdest one of the bunch and the most sought after is the 553, aka the SU-231 PEC. These have a unique dual-lever arms QD mount. They take 2 inline CR123 batteries, and they were one of the optics in the SOPMOD Block 2 program. They are also, in my opinion, very ugly, but since they're clone correct, people still want them. The 555 model is a version of the 553 that has an elongated body to take AA's instead of CR123s. That makes for a pretty torturous flowchart, but luckily the newer Transverse mounted battery series is a lot easier. I think we can lay it out in a simple Punnett square. You can break the newer Transverse EOTechs into the 3 series, which has night vision, and the 2 series, which doesn't, as well as the XPS, which is absolute co-witness with a crossbolt mount and rear buttons, and the EXPS, which is lower 1/3 co-witness with the QD mount and side buttons. Well, that wasn't so bad. You should probably pause the video here for a snack and a bathroom break, because we haven't even started talking about reticles yet. Today's video is brought to you in part by Munition Works. Munition Works builds ARs with smart part selection and painstaking attention to detail in the assembly process. I've become good friends with Dane, who runs Munition Works, and his approach to rifle building is fantastic. It's exactly how I would build a rifle if I had enough patience to use a torque wrench and a headspace gauge. Munition Works has recently introduced Mark II versions of their original flagship rifle, the Dissident, and their entry-level rifle, the Joe Carbine. Go check them out at munitionworks.com or click the Munition Works link on my Linktree page. If you use the code HOP at checkout, you can save a couple of bucks on a rifle, and you'll be supporting this channel and a good company that makes good rifles for a good price. Alright, back to the show. The traditional EOTech reticle they've been using since back in the holosight days is a 65 MOA circle with a single center dot. When you see an EOTech model with .A65 at the end, that's what they're referring to, the classic EOTech donut of death reticle. But some of the reticles EOTech has used over the years have been really weird. For example, there have been green illuminated versions of the EOTech that are illuminated with a green laser instead of a red laser. These have never been available with night vision settings. Apparently, green reticles are a lot harder to tune to work under night vision. Generally speaking, the cheaper non-night vision EOTechs are for hobbyists, not for professionals, and they tend to reflect that. Not just in configuration, but also maybe in build quality. They've never been rated to the same level of moisture intrusion, for example. Some of the more commonly seen alternative reticles are the -4 and -2. These have additional drop dots below the center dot that give you some extra subtensions to use when shooting at long range. There was also a model called the XPS-2-2, aka the 300 blackout reticle, which is the exact same subtensions as the EOTech 3-2 as far as I'm aware, but it has a cool engraving of the reticle on top, and it says 300 blackout on the side and looks really epic. Remember our rule of thumb, since this is a 2 series EOTech, it's not for serious buyers, just for the sort of person who's impressed by the word blackout. EOTech has also made a dot-only version of their reticle for a long time, formerly called the D1, kind of like how the -0 reticle used to be called the A65. Until recently, you could only get that reticle commercially in the form of the XPS-2-1. They did make a night vision compatible single-dot reticle EOTech, but only for certain military buyers. Recently, the EXPS-3-1 was released to the commercial market, thanks possibly in part to Lucas at T-Rex Arms, who is a big fan of that single dot. In a strange way, this is kind of the holy grail of EOTechs. Circle dot reticles are cool for fast target acquisition and whatever, but a lot of guys are buying EOTechs specifically for their performance under night vision, and when you drop the outside circle, the reticle becomes quite a lot more usable for passive aiming because it doesn't obscure as much of your target. That's not nearly as big of an issue on an EOTech as it is with a traditional red dot that has a circle dot reticle, typically because red dots don't have the level of brightness adjustment granularity that EOTechs do. Alright, so all of that stuff was very normal, and all of those things are still in current production. Those are sort of the flagship EOTech reticles and models, the ones that stay in the catalog year after year, the ones that people actually like to buy. But they have done some really weird shit. For example, the 512 with the XR308 reticle. I think this one was probably intended for use on an M240B machine gun. It has a large crosshair and then some additional drop dots with crazy long subtensions from 0.6 to 1.2 measured in kilometers. There's also the XR500 reticle, which is the same idea but for a 50 cal with subtensions that go out to 2000. These reticles are insanely complicated. I'm not sure you could pull this sort of thing off with a traditional red dot. However, there are some heads-up display style red dots from Meprolite that involve an entire menu system, so I guess anything's possible. Another interesting model worth bringing up is the XPS2-RF. The RF stands for rimfire, and this was actually a version of the XPS2 that was designed to mount to a narrow dovetail rail on a rimfire rifle. It's not surprising these are no longer in production because almost all new .22 rifles just come with a 1913 rail. You can just put a normal EOTech on there if that's what you're looking for. If you look around for old models of EOTech, you'll probably also come across the XPS2-FN and -Sage. These are models designed for use with less than lethal launchers. They have a reticle that's like a holographic representation of a grenade launcher sight, which looks very cool, but again, is only useful for low velocity, less lethal launchers. One of the stranger reticles that I think you can still get is the crossbow reticle. This one is used for, a crossbow. It has some built-in ranging features that I assume only work on a fully grown North American elk, and some subtensions that probably wouldn't work on any gunpowder weapon. Of course, we can't neglect to mention the biohazard reticle, which was one of those weird relics of the zombie craze. That one is just the biohazard symbol, which is way too large and complicated and probably obscures way too much of the target. But remember, it's a 2 series, so it's not for serious buyers. Speaking of EOTech's not for serious buyers, they recently introduced an Optics Planet exclusive version of the XPS2 with the Danger Close reticle, or DCR. This one carves out a chunk of the top and bottom of the 65 MOA circle and adds a little chevron thing at the bottom of the circle. It kind of looks like a ripoff of the Vortex Huey reticle, but actually it's more like a newer version of an older Brownells exclusive they used to make called the CQB T-Dot. That one also had a segmented lower circle, but it also added the second drop dot, the theory being that you can use that lower dot as a close range reference point. I'm sure it makes more sense to use the bottom of the circle or the additional chevron of the DCR, but even so, it'll all work out. My most highly sought after EOTech is actually a Steiner product, the Steiner EOLAD. These took the form of an EOTech 552 with a Steiner laser built into the shroud that attached on the side. They were available as multiple versions, some with just an IR laser, or IR and Viz, or IR Viz and Illum. They are incredibly expensive, extremely rare, and probably don't work very well because there's a very good probability that your hand will be in the way of the laser. But if you like the idea, Meprolite makes something called the MOR, which is basically the same. For a while, there was also a replacement battery box for the dual AA models of EOTech that had a built-in laser. These things look pretty ridiculous, and like with the EOLAD, I assume that they just destroy any sense of battery life you thought you might have had. Also, the design of these lasers means that the laser pointers are not zeroed with the reticle of the optic, which is one thing that the Meprolite Moore, the Wilcox Boss XE, and I think the ITL Mars all had going for them. Anyway, we could talk about EOTechs all day long. I'm sure I've missed some. I left out the side-mounted one for grenade launchers and the crew-served version pretty much on purpose. There have been just a ton of EOTech models and reticles over the years because the device itself basically never changes, which frees up EOTech to go wild with the magic of holography. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you like this channel, please subscribe to it. Check out the links in the video description to Subscribestar, where you can support this channel directly and get access to bonus videos and stuff, as well as my Linktree page, which has affiliate and social media stuff. I'll see you guys next time.